Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Numbers with McKissock Appraisal. I'm your host, Julie Mollendorf, and today's guest is Jason Ormiston. Jason is a certified appraiser in Missouri and Kansas. He's owned and operated an appraisal firm in Kansas City for years. He's who I look at when we talk about your appraisal peers. Jason and I have known each other for I don't even want to say how long. And when I have an appraisal problem, I contact Jason. So he's here today to share some of his thought processes. And Jason, you are the most confident appraiser I know. What is your secret to handling the unique cases that you handle?
Well, I tend, when I get an appraisal problem that I don't know, I have a pretty deep reservoir of people upon which to draw, where I can just call up and bounce ideas off of them. Guys that I've known, guys in the Midwestern sense, and that women too, that I'll call and just talk it out with them. And sometimes people have had the same issues. Sometimes people have had issues that are adjacent, but will give me good ideas, and that I can just begin working from there. Just begin the problem-solving process. It goes back to what we always learned in way back in the day, is that define your problem, and then you'll know where your solution is going. And a lot of times it's the client direction that will help you define the problem.
You work a lot in non-lending situations, whether it's assessment or legal, those kind of venues. And as the economy slows right now, appraisers are looking to non-lending sources of revenue.
Right.
When you are tackling those problems, how does that process differ than the traditional residential, here's your request, complete your 1004 form appraisal situation? Tell us about that.
The biggest thing is that every client is different. Even if they're in a state, no matter what you're dealing with, it's all different. And when you consider that you've got differences in all properties and all that, some people just need really basic information. Some people need to have the full boat, where they have the full gamut of information you can provide. I do a lot of income. And so I make sure that the product I'm going to give them is what they need and what they're looking for. And I make sure that I communicate to them this is a communication process. I don't want to hand them a 100-page document and say, done. I want them to be confident in what they have, because a lot of times someone who's using these things, it might be the first time they've ever really held one in their hands themselves. The loan officer looked at it or what have you. And this is the first time they're actually really going to have a chance to need to review an appraisal for their own purposes. And so I make sure that it's a consultation process as well as an appraisal process.
When I teach appraisal classes, one of the things we discuss is that your report doesn't need to say, look at me, I'm the smartest person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
If your user can't understand your technology or your techniques and your appraisal process, it doesn't do them any good.
Right.
So I think that appraisers need to embrace the scope of work decision and defining the problem with their client, and not be afraid to have the discussion about what your client needs and what they don't need.
Right. We just had an estate where they'd been in the process of dividing, because it was a couple commercial spots right next to some residential spots, and it was all in one plat. It had been since the 50s. And they were in the process of dividing and breaking it up to sell it when the husband died. And so, yeah, it was a real mess. But the benefit of it was that they knew zoning at that point and highest and best use inside and out. So I didn't have to. It was, again, going back to the consulting process. The realtor broker was great to work with. And but everyone in the process knew that part of it. So it's points like that, the new restricted reports really help, because I don't have to give them so much, and what I give them, they really need. And it helps the client a lot.
So you do a lot of restricted use reports.
I do a fair number of restricted use reports
Okay.
for, especially for states.
I think a lot of appraisers are afraid to do a restricted use report.
Sure.
And I find them almost freeing because you are really just conveying the information that your client needs in order to understand your value process.
Right.
So when you sit down with a client and they know they need an appraisal, but they don't know how to get there,
Mm-hmm.
how does your discussion go with that client on helping guide them to the service that they need?
Okay. The first thing I ask always is what's the purpose? Why are you calling me today? What are you looking for? And a lot of times they're cagey about it because they don't necessarily want you to know their business, but you have to know their business to some extent.
Right.
And I explained to them that after 2009, the re-regulation process, and I understand it was before 2009 when these things were in place, but everyone understands the re-regulation process in 2009. So it's a great place to start. And so I just tell them that every appraisal is written for its own purpose now. And it helps me help them if I know what they need it for. And once you get to that point, they understand why you're asking. And so they're more open about what they're looking for. But that also helps you because it helps you decide whether or not they're just shopping or just beginning the process, or whether you really have a guy who's going to go ahead and order a appraisal when you're finished talking to them. And I don't mind people talking to me when they're shopping at all. I often tell them, listen, even if you don't hire me, you need to hire somebody. And so don't put this off because, and especially in the States, but divorces also, they need to make a choice. And you can't, by kicking the process down the road, especially as busy as we've been over the last 2 years or however long, kicking it down the road isn't going to help anybody. And so make a choice. And so by just getting an idea of what the purpose is of the appraisal, then I know I have an idea, A, what they know, B, who's going to need the report and rely upon it, and C, what I can do to help them out, how I can help get them there.
Right. That's a great philosophy. I think we're hesitant sometimes to have those difficult conversations with the client up front. But I think if we have that conversation early on and everyone understands the expectations of the process and what they will get and what they won't get,
right,
I think that could solve a lot of problems down the road.
Sure. And you always get this, well, okay, my husband died 1.5 years ago. I need this appraisal done. And I'm hoping to use it to market. Well, these are different things. And that's one of the things they need to understand too, is what this appraisal is and what it isn't. Because you can't turn around and give this to a bank. It's not going to help you. You can't put it on the counter whenever you're offering it to the market and expect it to make a difference, because it absolutely does not make a difference then. And it really doesn't help you at all. So that, again, that's the discussion process. And I try to add consulting to the verbiage as often as I can, because it is important that they understand that you're not, at some point, you're not working for free anymore. Is that you are providing your expertise, and that expertise is going to cost money. And
I wish we had left the consulting pieces in use. Those are pieces that I think we as appraisers sometimes don't realize how much we do in the consulting consulting venue.
Yes, absolutely.
So you tackle some unusual problems. I was told that with your firm, one of your mottos is "We say yes." Tell me how sometimes it's harder than others to say yes when you are asked to do appraisals, and how do you manage?
Well, okay. First of all, what just say yes means is certainly not related to value, of course, because that's separate and apart. But as far as the assignments go, people sometimes have very difficult questions that they need to ask. I've worked with assessment departments and delineating neighborhoods, worked with lawsuits for various reasons or various things that some people have difficulty extracting value from the market. And I used to subscribe for a long time. I subscribed to LexisNexis where I could go in and I could research scholarly articles where people have actually done this work before and use some of the same techniques to pull value out of a market. And things like four-walled construction versus Walmart cinder block construction. How does that affect valuation for properties that are right next door? And that research has been done. People have already done it, and they've done really good work on it. And you can apply some of the same techniques to extract the value from the market and be able to give a reasonable idea of what that is actually going to do to a market and help mitigate those use changes whenever a developer wants to go in and repurpose properties. And a lot of times people will look at this as a you're going to win, I'm going to lose. It doesn't have to be that way, because we know one of the properties that I worked on, it was a redevelopment of a public space that was going to be moved over to a type of much higher density use. Okay. And so all the residential in the area had a serious problem with it, as you can understand.
Sure.
But the architect had done a great job of listening to what people were saying and going back and redoing his plans and trying to make it better for the transition. And as it turns out, he was going to add water features that were going to help. Actually, I mean, people pay significant percentages of their value sometimes just for that water feature. And so, but that was difficult to get across in and of itself, is that this is actually going to end up helping you, because you're going to be overlooking a water features, landscape, and all that. And that's worth money to you. It's not going
so your developer ended up working with the single family property owners instead of against.
Yeah. I mean, there were still some diehards that just plain did not want changes in use, but they did. They worked it out. They got a plurality of people, as well as the city councilman for the region. They went in and made the change, accommodating as many people as possible. And it worked overall. I've been back to the area, and they did a great job.
So how do you get jobs like that, Jason? How do you market yourself? How did those come about?
Okay, so I'm active in like Knights of Columbus. I'm active in my church. My kids go to a parochial school, and I keep in contact with a lot of people. For a time, I used to teach. I taught for Bobbitt for a while, and I taught for the USDA. And I would always leave a stack of cards at the front, saying, if you ever have a problem, be it state agency, be it regulatory, anything, call me, because I want to hear about it. I may have some experience in it. I may know somebody that you can call that can help you out. But I want to hear about the problems, and it doesn't bother me at all. And I've had a lot of people take me up on that. And I've kept contact with those people.
I think that's so valuable. I think our profession gets extremely isolated in our day-to-day work, especially if you focus primarily on lending work.
Right.
We are more powerful together. And USPAP says we need to do what our peers do. Mm-hmm. But if we don't ever talk with our peers, it's hard to understand what's happening out there. So yes, the power of a network is key. And as I said at the beginning, you are one of those people I use as a sounding board. I think we have that reciprocal relationship over the years. And there have been several times when I've looked at a problem through one lens, and then after talking with you, I can look at it through a completely different lens and come to a more robust, strong conclusion. I think that is that networking, also just as you said, the social networking, whether it's civic organizations, church, school, those kinds of organizations, places to meet and discuss, and not to be afraid to be a consultation, to be a consultant to people. And you're going to give those services away a lot for free sometimes. Right. But they can grow, and the referral network is extremely powerful.
Right. And one of the things I think your network of people from whom you can draw for experience is not limited to appraisers. When I the first assessment department I worked for, I hired a mathematician who was a friend of mine. I hired a guy who worked at American Express who did a lot of their data, and they helped me rewrite some of the algorithms that the county was using. And I have a statistical background, but if that was college, much, much different than Standard 6. And so, but they helped me generate this. We ended up generating an algorithm to just cut off the tails off of what the county had done. And I could not have done it without them. And they're not appraisers. Right. In fact, the first data set that I sent over to the American Express guy, he said, "Where's the rest of it?" Because he's accustomed to dealing with, a small data samples, 100,000 records. Wow. And I sent him over one with 300. Is this what you get, pal? Wow. Got to make it work. So we did.
Interesting. I think problem solving skills are so valuable in our profession, and I think right. We frequently get laser focused on. I'm an appraiser, and I appraise for lending situations, mm-hmm. and we forget it's a big world out there, right. and many appraisal types and clients are out there outside the lending world.
Right.
How many appraisers do you have in your firm, Jason?
Well, we have about 5 people that are, everyone's a free agent, right? And so okay. People can do and will do whatever. But we have about 5 people that we rely upon daily that have their specialty, that have their niche products they work on. And so we've got a guy that works on investment properties, that rehabbers, flips, that sort of thing. We have a girl who is great at high-end construction, and I've relied on her. What's funny is she's only been appraising for about, 7 years now. That time flies, right? But I go back to her now for help with costs because she's so good at it, and she just knows off the top of her head when costs are wonky, and so she's great. And so I love condos. I do when I do residential lending or I do condos. I like to stay in that area. So everyone has their thing that they enjoy doing. So
right.
But then we have another
and having a diverse group of appraisers there right. that do have their specialties mm-hmm. Can make you stronger, very much stronger as a firm.
Right.
That's impressive. You may have that number of appraisers at your particular firm, but you also work closely with other appraisal firms
right.
located in the Kansas City metro. That's where we both are. How do you build those relationships and view them as your peers as opposed to your competitors?
It is a philosophy I have that I just don't. I try to help them out when I can because there's enough. I mean, I understand people are slow down, but for the most part, there's enough business out there. We don't have to be undercutting each other and saying bad things about one another and all of that. I generally enjoy when I do meet them or meet with them. I generally enjoy hanging out with them and talking to them, and it's just not like that. There's enough of variation. Not a lot of people like to do condos around here because they can be difficult. They can be a pain.
They can
to work with, and so I get referred to that business sometimes. I get referred to a lot of divorce business because divorce business can be a pain too. So right. If you're going to go to court, it's probably going to be for divorce. So,
and I don't know about you, I found that giving court testimony strengthened me as an appraiser in ways that you can't even imagine. Mm-hmm. Just the process of explaining your appraisal procedures and your thought process, your methodology to someone who is not an appraiser, and then also the cross-examination. Having someone attempt to poke holes in your theory and your right. methodology right. Strengthens you as an appraiser, as an expert in the field. How did you look at testimony?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I did some work for the FBI briefly. I mean, on a project. And so they counseled me on testimony to shut up a lot, to answer what you're being asked, and then leave it at that and let them ask what they will. And that was really helpful. And I've talked to I have some attorney friends that I've spoken with about that. And to being verbose is not necessarily helpful. And so I tend to not. I try to be as short and succinct as I possibly can.
Right. And just the facts.
Yeah. Right. And in the last 2 years, since everything has been so busy, I've actually taken a lot of the divorce work, and I've told them to go back to the judge or the mediator or whatever they're working with, and try to get the mediator to order appraisals, because we're too busy right now. And frankly, I get frustrated being in some of those hearings, the really obnoxious disputes where they're fighting over everything in the kitchen sink. I did one time where it was a large house and it was a lot of money, but the appraisals that we had done were about a year and a half apart, that their side had done and our side had done. And the difference in the appraisal amount was within, if you just took appreciation, we were within about 1% of each other.
Right.
And I pointed that out to my attorney, and he said, that doesn't help us out at all. So do not answer that unless you're being correct. And I hate that.
Right.
I hate that. I think it's so counterproductive, but he's my client. I do what I do. And so
in those scenarios, a lot of times the only person that wins is the attorney.
Right. And so it's counterproductive. I try to, please go back and get the judge to order it so that you can just give one.
Right. And it seems, my experience is, no matter how solid my report is, if the opposing side has an appraisal report, it seems that most of the time the judge just goes right in the middle of the two. There's not a lot of discussion over which one is more reliable, which is what should happen. But it seems they just, I wish there was a way that we could just have one appraisal in that situation.
It would be, that's what I urge them to do. I don't, it's funny how rarely I get calls back from those people. And I don't know whether that meant that the judge agreed and they just chose someone else, or whether they just found someone else who wanted to argue with it, because people get crazy with divorces. They get nuts.
Sure. So as we're discussing varying your appraisal practice, you talked about doing legal work. You talked about doing some consulting. One of the areas that will always be present is tax appeal work.
Right.
People are always going to want to protest their taxes. That's just a way of the world. How do you handle when someone comes to you and says, I want to hire you to appraise my property because my taxes are too high? How do you triage that and have that discussion with your client?
Okay. First, I'm trying to get too nerdy with them, and that the tax, your assessment does not exactly equal your taxes that you're going to pay. That's based on your mill. But regardless, I understand how A equals B in a lot of their minds. But there are times when you're going to get these tax appeal assignments when they are probably undervalued. And so sometimes that going up front, where, hey, I think you're actually doing pretty well. And either you can tell them you're probably best off, because assessors can raise value too on tax. You'll have data turned in, and the assessor will say, great, thank you. Now we're going to raise your assessment by $100,000. And you need to counsel them that as well, as that you don't want to necessarily be the one who's going to be the reason for their assessment to increase. And
so how do you walk the line between appraising and advocating and staying away from the advocacy piece of that?
Sure. That is one thing I do tell them, as I explain to them that I can't be an advocate, and then I'm not going to go searching for comparables that are going to prove the value that they believe to be accurate. One of the things you want to ask is you want to find out why they think that, because they may have a legit case. We have erosion in the back of our building and it's going to take $250,000 to mitigate. Okay. Well, now we're on to something, and to where we may not even need an appraisal at all if you want to take this information to the county. And that's where the consultant part, that's where I try to start with these guys, is that let's start with the consulting part. And, maybe we're going to talk for 2 hours and we'll be done. And maybe you do need a full appraisal. So I'm a residential appraiser. I don't write commercial appraisals. I work with the commercial appraiser and I help him crunch numbers. I help him do statistical analysis. I work with, you can get some larger data sets, and we have some both at our company, and we have some through CoStar and through Realist, that sort of thing. Okay. Where we can extract some information that is available in the market that it may not even necessarily be a full appraisal that they need. They just need to have a summary of numbers, a summary of information. It really depends on how the county works. There are certain counties that are a lot easier to deal with than others. And some counties have an informal process that make it a lot easier, where it's just a discussion. But once they understand that you cannot be an advocate, that actually helps you, because they know that if you're going to give them a piece of advice, that you're not coming from a place where I just want to bill you more money. You're coming from a place of truth, where you're trying to help them, because the truth's going to get you regardless, right? If you go in and lie to an assessment department, it's trouble.
Right.
And so you can help people out that way as well. And not being an advocate is much better than actually being an advocate, in my opinion.
Sure.
And making sure they understand that.
And that's a difficult discussion to have frequently, in that I cannot develop something that furthers your opinion. It may coincide with your opinion, but I cannot skew my report to your point of view.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. That is the basis of appraising, that impartial, objective mindset. So, so you're working with a taxpayer, and they feel their assessment is too high. Talk me through the discussion that you have with them. What kind of questions do you ask? How do you clarify what they're viewing or what they're feeling?
Okay. So when it's residential, we're going to talk about really the same pre-inspection questions that you ask when you're doing a mortgage transaction. Tell me about your house. When did you buy it? How much? What have you done to it in the last 5-10 years? Major improvements, things that need to be improved, and that sort of thing. Do you have some photos? Do you want to text me some photos of your bathroom that you ripped out 2 months ago? Because that doesn't necessarily help you either. Because remember, it's January 1st as of the in Missouri. Right. January 1st.
Getting that taxpayer to understand, I'm not valuing your property as it stands today. I'm valuing it as it stood on the date of assessment, which typically is that January 1 situation.
So we just walk through that process. And then once we get to that point, I may say to them, I may talk to them about a consultation where let's explore some values in the area. And sometimes I do it with them on the phone, and where we discuss the values in their neighborhood. And a full appraisal, if that's going to be required, it may or may not actually be of value to get it, depending upon the municipality. Because if the county's going to shoot it right back up next year, and they're going to save $400 on taxes, but I'm going to charge them $350, and that's if they agree with me, which a lot of times they don't. They'll do what that judge did if you talked about the split it down the middle,
right?
And so
they've done their research in their mind. They've gone on Zillow. They've asked around. This is what people tell them their house is worth. Talk to me about the discussion you have with them then, when they come in with a preconceived notion of what their home is worth.
Mhm.
How do you discuss that?
We talk about what value is and how you get to value and what comparables mean and why the comparable that's 4 doors away is more important than the one that's sold a mile away,
Right.
or in some cases vice versa, where that one that's a mile away actually is pretty darn relevant for your house. And how we can use the data, what their possibilities of winning are, and if they want to really go ahead with the process. And I mean, of all the tax appeal work that we do, residential, I would bet maybe 10% comes out to an actual appraisal. And usually it's a consultation where I can help them prepare the paperwork that they're going to represent themselves. And
Okay.
I don't mind going in front of the BOE, the Board of Equalization, if that is what they do in your market. I really actually kind of enjoy it, going into the BOE and talking to them about value and about what's going on. And but they have to understand where the county's coming from, and that they may not always see it that way. And if
Sure.
if you just have a dated property or whatever, that may or may not help you. Pictures do tell 1,000 words, though. I mean, pictures will help a lot. Pictures help probably more than they should, but pictures are tremendously helpful.
Right. Especially if you're working in a bifurcated kind of market where you have those that have been renovated and those that have not.
Right.
They're all 60-year-old homes. Some have been gutted, some have not.
Right.
If it seems like assessment in those areas typically falls right in the middle.
Mhm.
So some are too high, some are too low.
Right.
Yeah, definitely the pictures help in those scenarios. And educating them to be their own advocate, to go before their assessor or assessment department and have that discussion about value.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's the best for them. They don't want to pay me to do a full one. They're not going to get their value out of it. They're going to end up paying all that money, and who knows what the assessor will do.
So your consultation, your experience, I think is a unique thing that you bring to the table when you are meeting with potential clients. And you said you find a lot of clients through your networking processes. What recommendation do you have for a new appraiser in the profession that wants to think outside the lending box and get into some of these more unique appraisal situations? What would you say to them?
A lot of times it just comes with experience, is that you've got to get out there and do it. You've got to talk to a lot of people, network, join organizations that appraisers are members of. But nothing beats experience, and meeting older appraisers, especially, and trying not to get the best out of them. Don't get jaded about the business, because people that do a lot of one style of work can get jaded. I have a lot of appraiser friends they get upset about different rules, different regulations, and I understand, I get it, but
right.
Those guys oftentimes, while they're cranky, they know a lot, and picking their brain can be very helpful. But a new appraiser that's just entering the business, they have to get work under their belt. They have to get experience, and offering to help. I mean, as appraisers, we do a lot of free work all the time anyway for clients, for whatever. It just happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go ask an old appraiser if you can hang out with them for a while and learn what they do, and be of utility on a more difficult assignment. And
Interesting.
just work with them that way, because there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of things that they do at road, especially guys that have been around for a long time that do right of way work. I would love that's one area where I haven't done a lot, and I would like to do more of that. it's easier for a commercial appraiser to do that than a residential guy, especially. But a lot of those right-of-way assignments are publicly available. They're public information. They're on websites where you can download and read it and find out what they did. And there's stuff there that I guarantee you've never thought of.
Oh, absolutely.
It's great to read.
When you talk about pairing with a more veteran appraiser, that's an interesting thought process. I hadn't thought of that. Sometimes we get requests for unusual appraisal assignments that we don't particularly feel competent to do ourselves. And so we tend to refer it on and kind of push it out the door. Maybe a different way to look at that scenario is to refer to a more veteran or more experienced appraiser in that field, but say, hey, can I tag along as you do this? Can I be a part of that process?
Yes.
So you can learn and widen your skill set.
Right. We just had a divorce case that came in. It was a jumbo, meaning a really expensive property on a lake. And there were lots of complications about it because it had been run down a little bit, hadn't been well maintained. And the guy in our office that does a lot of the high-end work for residential properties, he took it, and the referring appraiser actually did that, called him up out of the blue and said that he had been a review appraiser in the past that worked for a bank, and he'd seen his name a number of times associated with these types of files. And so he did. He referred the business on and said, basically, please, can I hang out and just go along with you and do the sketch and what have you? I mean, the house was 2 circles put together. It was very odd. And so, it was everything you can have under one roof. And that's what he did. And I never actually saw the guy, but Chris, who worked with him, said that he was a great guy. And they hung out for a couple of days straight working on this file.
Very interesting. Appraisers, we tend to isolate ourselves. So you're advocating the opposite. Don't isolate yourself. Network, meet your peers, reach out to them, whether it's through social media, whether it's, a LinkedIn type of way. What organization wise, appraisers need to be more open to joining, whether it might be Chamber of Commerce, or you said a civic organization, Knights of Columbus kind of thing. When I was back in my teaching days, I had someone who recommended understanding the great horned animal organizations like the Elks and the Eagles and the Order of the Buffalo or whatever, the Lions, those civic organizations. And I think as a generation, those are groups that we can look to building that network. It may not result in actual appraisals, but it results in contacts and the networking feature that I think a lot of us are lacking.
Yeah, there's a book written maybe 20 years ago. It's called Bowling Alone, and it's about that taking place in American society in general. And that he was a sociologist, and his thesis was that a lot of people in America are not joining those organizations anymore, not attending church as much, that sort of thing. And it is endemic in our society at large that people are isolating, and COVID certainly didn't help.
Right.
But there's a lot to be gained from these things.
Absolutely. And whatever direction you want to take it, whether it's a political, a religious, a social, any of those directions, getting active in your community and knowing your neighbors, your peers, your coworkers, those kinds of things will bring around consulting opportunities, appraisal opportunities, and build your business, build your reputation.
Right. Absolutely.
I think is crucial. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Jason.
It's good talking
again,
to you.
This was Jason Ormiston, owner of Todd Appraisal in Kansas City, and one of my longtime friends, associates, and definitely my appraisal peer. So appreciate having you here today, Jason. And this was Beyond the Numbers with McKissock Appraisal. I'm your host, Julie Mollendorf. Thank you for being with us today.